I was cuffed on my own porch, while the HOA president smiled like she'd rehearsed it. The deputy reading trespass off a clipboard like my last name wasn't still burned into the fence post. And somewhere across town, my dad lay in the ICU with a heart monitor, trying to bargain with time. That was the moment I realized I'd either let a stranger rewrite our family history, or I'd take the pen back. Ink stains and all. My name is Sam Carter. I'm 34, a corporate attorney, who swore years ago I'd never come back except for Christmas and emergencies. And then at 5 a.m., my phone lit up with a hospital number that didn't sound like any kind of Christmas. The nurse saying, critical condition, possible heart attack. No other next of kin. Please bring personal effects if you can. I didn't think I packed in 7 minutes. Suit pants, old boots, my hands shaking like the past had caffeine, and I drove 8 hours on a ribbon of highway that felt like a long apology I wasn't ready to speak out loud. When I pulled into St. Luke's, I braced for my father to bark, or curse, or pretend sleep to win the last word. But he lay small and gray under machines that beeped too slow, and the doctor said they'd found him outside a liquor store, disoriented, which made no sense for a man who'd sworn off whiskey when I was a kid. And then the doctor said they needed his meds and clothes, and asked if I had access to his house. I said yes, like muscle memory, and walked out, carrying a promise I didn't know how to keep. I turned off the county road, and there it was. A brand new steel gate, like a wall, where a gravel drive used to be a white SUV with Green Haven HOA on the side. A camera, red light blinking like it knew more than me, and 2 guards who looked like they'd auditioned for authority and landed the role, the tall one saying, "Credentials," the short one, "chewing gum," and pointing to a laminated sheet. And me saying, "This is the Carter farm. My dad's in a coma. I need to get his medication, you know what I mean." And them trading a smirk, like I'd told a joke they didn't get. The tall one said the parcel was under HOA jurisdiction. Now the short one said I wasn't on the approved list. And when I laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't mean funny, he tapped the camera and told me to smile for the record. Then she arrived. Karen Blake, mid-40s. Suit pressed so flat it could cut paper binder hugged to her ribs. The kind of smile you learn in a mirror. And she said, Carter Shoreline access was signed over. You will need a guest pass. Fines are outstanding. We're all about community standards, and I told her my father would sell the sky before he sold the shoreline, and she said, then he must be very motivated. I drove back to town, because the machines were louder than my temper. Slept 3 hours in a chair that squeaked every time I remembered a fight I'd lost. And at 6:02 a.m., someone pounded our old front door hard enough to shake the dust off my high school photo. A compliance officer in a white polo handing me a yellow slip and saying, "Here, section 3.1. It's a $500 fine for leaving a hose across the walk, second offense. Double sign here." And I said, "My dad is in the ICU," and he repeated, "The CCRs are health neutral," like he was proud of the sentence. Yeah, that happened. By noon, the water pressure fell to a whisper. The kitchen sink coughed air. A neighbor named Jack told me, "Suits came days ago with a stack of papers and their own security." And when I walked upstairs to grab Dad's jacket, I found drawers. Yanked papers. Scattered. Photo albums. Dumped like someone had gone shopping for our deed and didn't bother cleaning up after. And then the floor creaked, and a deputy filled the doorway, gun down. But voice up. Hands where I can see them on the ground. And I said, "This is my father's house." And he said, "You're under arrest for trespass and destruction of private property from the gate." And next thing I knew, My cheek was pressed to the boards. I'd raced across at 8 years old, and outside the HOA guards were looking at me like a story they planned to tell later. In the holding cell, the air tasted like bleach and resentment. And that's when Karen walked in, wearing the same calm, like it came with the blazer, the deputy showing me tablet footage of me ramming the gate. Yeah, I'd reversed and floored it, because they put a wall between me and my father. And Karen said, attempted vehicular assault destruction, illegal entry. You're not on the title, and I said, he's in a coma. And she said, burden of proof is on you now. They gave me one call, and I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Agent Leo Turner, picking up with a voice that sounded like we were back in a law school library, arguing over evidence, and I told him everything. And he said, sit tight. My dad knows the DA out here. Greenhaven's already on a federal radar, and the holding cell door opened an hour later, like somebody had cut the right wire. 2 agents in suits, Leo behind them. Not smiling, because this wasn't a smiling moment, and they walked me into a conference room and slid me a folder labeled like a secret you half expect to be a trick. Inside was everything I needed to know. Greenhaven had been sniffing around family properties operating in the gray until it went black. And then Leo put 3 pages on the table in a deed with my dad's name in a crooked script. A sales agreement stamped 5 days earlier, and a notary license number that belonged to a man who died last year in Michigan. And I felt a kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning, because you don't expect a dead man to sign your father's land away. We got warrants by morning. Leo's words, not mine. One for the HOA office, and one for Karen's place, and I watched agents bag files like they were scooping up fish, flopping on a dock. Servers mirrored drawers, popped a conference room lined with signatures that didn't match, and a ledger that did. Blake Community Services LLC receiving consulting fees that looked a lot like dues in disguise. Shoreline conversions scribbled in the margin, like a plan that forgot people live in the middle of plans. I won't pretend I was noble. I was angry in a way that didn't have a good exit, and the only thing keeping me upright was the fact that this time the paper was bleeding in the right direction. And when Leo said, bold people leave trails, I believed him because I could see the footprints. The meeting felt like a courtroom with worse lighting. Folding chairs, lemon cleaner, the CCR binder on a wobbly podium. Neighbors carrying coffee like shields, and Karen tapping a mic and saying, we're here to address harassment of staff. And I stood and said, we're here because you forged a deed. And the room made that sound people make when the story they heard on the sidewalk just walked inside. I handed packets to the secretary and the sergeant-at-arms, because paper earns trust when it goes through the right hands, held up the notary's death certificate. With the date in red, threw a signature overlay on the projector, so even the back row could see how the black lines traced my dad's blue ones too perfectly, and read ledger entries with Blake. Community Services LLC highlighted, and Marisol, a neighbor who had watched too many midnight inspections, stood and said she saw their tape measures on our dock last Thursday, and Karen tried to gavel me down, and the rubber tip popped off and rolled under the podium like a tiny punchline that didn't know it was funny. Aisha Patel. My attorney stood and cited Section 7, 4 for emergency removal of an officer. For cause, a simple majority, and people raised hands like it meant something because it did. And I called Tom Reynolds from County Records on speaker, and he said the notary license was already flagged for criminal referral. And that's when the back door opened, and 2 deputies walked in. With that particular quiet law uses when it has backup, and the tall one took the mic like it was a piece of mail and said, Ms. Karen Blake, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and misuse of association funds." And her face went white, then pink, then the color of a morning after a bad story. And she whispered, and the deputy shook his head. And when the cuffs clicked, I felt it in my teeth. We didn't cheer. I didn't want a parade. My dad was still in a hospital bed, and there was a mountain of filings waiting on my kitchen table. But sometimes justice is just a sound, and that sound was enough to reset the room. If you're expecting the perfect epilogue, I can tell you this much. The county clerk moved to unwind the fake transfer. The board voted to refer everything to the DA. The water pressure came back like someone apologized. And I drove to the hospital with a bag of clothes and the ledger in a manila folder, and sat beside my dad, while he looked out the window like he was trying to remember if the sky had always been that wide. He didn't say much at first. Then he asked if I'd come home for good, and I said for now. And he nodded like that was heavier than it sounded, and we didn't fix decades in a night. But we stopped the bleeding, and in a town where people shrug and say, "That's just how it is," a room full of neighbors chose differently. So here's where I leave it. At the moment, the gavel fell without a tip, and the cuffs found their mark at the line between rules and the people who think they get to weaponize them, at the question that still hangs there for anyone who's ever been fined at dawn for a hose on the walk. What do you think? Did the HOA protect the community or try to own it? Would you have rammed the gate or paid the fine? Where's the line between order and control? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what your neighborhood does right or wrong at like. If you believe fines don't get to replace the law. Subscribe if you want more real stories told from the inside. And if you've got your own HOA saga, share it. I'll be in the replies listening.